live on the World Wide Web. All right, as he said, I'm Scott McDaniel. I'm Executive Director of the Susquehannock Wildlife Society. Thanks for coming tonight. We're talking about one of my favorite topics in the world, which is snakes, partly because people hate them so much, and it's so unfounded that I really feel it's part of my job to get out there and help people better understand them, especially help kids to appreciate and love snakes so that they can break the cycle of people going out and killing snakes and hating them and giving them this bad reputation, which is really undeserved. So we really like to make sure that people know the truth about wildlife so that they can protect them and also just appreciate them and enjoy them out in the wild, right? So a little bit about my organization before we start talking about our serpent friends. We're a 501c3. We started in 2011, and we do research, education, and rescue. So all those things kind of come together to equal conservation, which just means protecting our natural world. And our focus is the lower Susquehanna region. So we kind of are a little fuzzy on that because technically we're not in the lower Susquehanna here, but we kind of see that as the watershed, but also just kind of that ecosystem, and meaning that the top of the bay. There's a lot of really great Chesapeake Bay groups, and we feel the Chesapeake Bay gets a lot of attention, which it deserves, but the Susquehanna, kind of the top of the bay, and that kind of Piedmont where it meets the coastal plain system there, Hartford County, Cecil County, into Pennsylvania, some of Baltimore. We kind of feel that's a little bit of a forgotten, kind of underserved ecosystem because we don't have the blue crabs, focus, the oysters, and all the horrible things that are going up the bay that need attention. But the Susquehanna, you always hear kind of skipped over when we're talking about pollution in the bay and the watershed and the water quality stuff. So we really wanted to focus on that, and also it's our backyard. So our organization is based in Hartford County, so what better place to start work to protect wildlife than your own backyard? And we wanted to make sure people understood what was in their own backyard. So our research, we really love science, and part of that is we didn't want to just talk about science that other people went out and figured out. We wanted to do some of it of our own. So we actually do hands-on research, and we've published studies on a lot of species, almost all reptiles and amphibians. I'm a herp kid. I grew up catching turtles and frogs and snakes, like I'm sure a lot of you do, and it became a lifelong passion. Ninja Turtles also had something to do with that, and it's also why I eat too much pizza. But we also do some things with salamanders and snakes and butterflies, like the Baltimore checker spot butterfly, which is our state insect, and I gave a talk about that whenever that was, 6 months to 5 years ago. It's all blur. Yeah, it was in the last year. Yeah, I think you're right. That feels like it was really recent. I know. And mammals. We do a lot of trail camera stuff with mammals and all that cool stuff. And snakes. So a lot of what we do is education, like tonight, but we learn things, so we want to teach people about them. And we use social media, unfortunately, to do a lot of this. It can be a really good tool, and it can also be a nightmare, as a lot of you know, especially you probably learned during the pandemic that you don't ever want to be on social media again. But we do use it as a tool to help people understand wildlife, to do outreach, to tell people about our events. We do things like our vernal pool walk every spring, which Natural History Society does as well. So we always try to share each other's events and try to work together to get people outdoors and see these things in the wild too. It's fun being here in this really cool building, but we also want to get you out in nature to see these things too, right? And we'll share some of our messaging too around snakes and other reptiles. So we also do hands-on rescue, so we actually go out and catch injured animals. My friend Angela does a lot of this as well. It's not easy, and you have to go chase after birds like vultures that run like chickens, and eagles that thrash and throw their talons at your face, and all those sorts of things. But sometimes we do actually get calls for injured or trapped herps. So herps are reptiles, for those that don't know. And it's a short word for herpetology, or herpetological study. So we do some mammals, like we will get calls for things A lot of times it's just talking people out of rescuing things that don't need to be rescued most of the time, but sometimes we do get some really interesting calls and some really interesting species that are trapped somewhere they shouldn't be, or they have like a growth or a tumor on their head, like this wood turtle. A lot of turtles get hit by cars, obviously. And then we see some snakes in some pretty interesting predicaments, which we'll talk about. And in conservation, these are some of our focal species just that are a little bit more rare, unusual, misunderstood in the kind of Hartford, Cecil, Lower Susquehanna region. One thing I just want to plug real quick is the Wildlife Center, which we are under construction seemingly forever. But since 2015, we've been working on this really cool project. It's a 20-acre site up in Hartford County where we're converting what was a small farm into a center. We do habitat restoration. We do outreach. We have a lab there. We do hands-on research there. We protect some wildlife there. We're reintroducing the Baltimore checker spot butterfly there that used to be on the site. With the toast plant, the white turtlehead. We're doing all kinds of cool things like this snake den that we built along our barn in our field, which I actually have a little better picture of, but I forgot to do a separate slide. But we actually created snake dens where we built these chambers underground with cinder blocks, and then we have pipes that go down underground to get them below the frost level, because when animals hibernate, and with reptiles, it's actually called brumate, brumation. So they will go underground below the frost line and spend the winter there to be protected from the cold. So we actually created these spots, one in the field, which we just dug out, but the barn actually had a stairwell going underground that we had to seal off. So we decided to actually just build a chamber underground and put a bunch of rocks on top of it and run pipes into it. So kind of an experiment we've been working with for a while. We'll see how successful it is in the long term, but it's pretty cool. So meadow restoration, all that fun stuff, vernal pools, you name it, we're trying it. And pawpaws, which you probably still smell the pawpaw on me. I've been processing pawpaws all week for our festival that's coming up on September 30th at a local ice cream dairy where we make really sweet ice cream, literally and figuratively sweet. We also have a stargazing platform, cool stuff like that. So we're trying to do all kinds of things. We're going to do a hawk watch there and some really cool stuff. This is the artist rendition that has now morphed into something a little different, but this is kind of a mock-up, which now there's actually real stuff in there, which I didn't take pictures of. That'll be part of a big unveiling later this year into next year. But we have all these really cool kind of immersive displays with some live animals and some models and fake kind of displays to show you different ecosystems for the region. So, talk about snakes. That's what you're here for, right? That's what you paid the big bucks to come see, right? So snakes are kind of part of our culture. You hear a lot of negative things about snakes. There's the weird snake people that really like snakes, like us. I assume if you are here, you're probably one of the weird snake people, so welcome. You're one of us. But in our culture, I use Indiana Jones as the joke because I love Indiana Jones, but also it's that whole thing. Like, people are afraid of snake. It's like almost the people's identity now, especially on social media. What are some of the things you hear as soon as someone posts a photo of a snake? Can you guys tell me? Raise your hands. What are some of the comments? Like, they're almost like memes at this point. Shivers. So hearing that. Thank you. That's a good one. It's a bad one, but it's accurate. Yes. Yep, they're scary, they're evil, right? So what else? What do you have to do if you find a snake in your house? Yep, that one's as old as time, I think, right? Yeah, they're going to move, or what else would they do to their house? Yeah, burn it with fire, right? You're going to burn your house down. So you find a snake, so you're just going to burn your house down, right? That's a pretty logical course of action for finding a wildlife species that's just part of the ecosystem. And like 90% of them are completely harmless, and the ones that are venomous still aren't going to bite you, right? Most likely. So it's like very frustrating as a wildlife educator to have a species that we know is so important and so special and threatened in a lot of ways that people just vehemently hate, like viscerally, like they see it and they just get mad. And like some people, that actually have true fear of snakes, though, and I want to say this because this is important, and I've been educated about this over the years. If you have a real phobia of snakes, that's a serious thing, right? And I don't want to make light of that because people have real phobias. They are actually afraid. And I've talked to people that have phobias of things that are like, and scientists that have phobias. They're like, I understand why this is not what I feel like it is. I understand all the science behind it, and I'm still afraid. Like I still pass out, I faint. So I get it, and I really very much sympathize with that. So I don't want to make light of that part. The people that are like that, you know, I feel for them, right? But then other people are just, they're just repeating things. They're exaggerating, and they're also just spewing a lot of hate for something that is important. And the problem with that is it leads to these animals being killed. You know, if every time someone sees something, they're going to misidentify it, they're going to say it's going to hurt them, and that sort of thing. You know, that's going to lead to these animals getting killed. So what we like to start with when we start educating people about snakes, though, and it's really spiders too, because they're really in the same boat, right? So people just kill a spider on sight, is they're beautiful. I really believe that. And if you look at these animals, these are all snakes that are native to Maryland. I mean, look at all the diversity, the colors, the patterns, the shapes. These are really special animals. You know, they're not this generic thing that you can't tell one from another. You know, and if you look at this picture, these are all copperheads, right? Right? Am I correct? Every single one of these is a copperhead, right? So, and water moccasin. So you can just flip it. It's water moccasin, copperhead, just flip them back and forth, right? And it's crazy because our science literacy is so poor sometimes with people in society. We've been talking about an article just came out this week, and it was a school. There was a harmless water snake in the school. They shut down the whole school, evacuated the school, and they sent like a pest control company in who said, "Oh yeah, they're breeding in here, so now you're gonna have to pay for all this like snake repellent, which is literally like it doesn't work." So like the stuff people go in the store, like Home Depot or whoever, and buy this stuff, it's just half the time you're putting poison in your house to get rid of something that's not going to hurt you. And no one wants a snake in their house. Don't get me wrong. We don't want wildlife in our house. It belongs outside. But you're going to put all this poison around so that you don't get hurt by something that's not going to hurt you, which is very counterintuitive to me. But so one of the big things that we started doing was this just campaign online, which is don't kill snakes. And it was just very simple. That was the message. And you don't have to like them. You don't have to love them. You don't have to play with them. You don't have to go looking for them. You don't have to take pictures of them. Just don't kill them. And that was the message I told my grandfather all the time because he grew up in a very different era, but to him, the snakes were evil, quote unquote. You know, they just kind of saw them as this demonic thing that you just saw them and you killed them. And over time, just me incessantly nagging him to say, Grandpa, just promise me you won't kill them. Just leave them alone. Just don't kill them, right? And eventually he was like, Scotty, I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him. You know, I just let him go. I was like, thank you, thank you. So I was really proud of him. I think he still hated him, but he just, for me, he just knew I would berate him if he did kill him. So that was good. So I always use this story here of this wonderful family who reached out to me and was, the mother said, hey, I had some snakes get into my house, and these are just rat snakes, right? Once again, you don't want them in your house. They're there because they're there for food, right? So they're there looking for food, or you have mice. The good thing about snakes, though, is that they are really great at controlling rodents, more so than most species. So if you think of cats, hawks, owls, other things that eat rodents that control these pests, in which these pests carry ticks and spread Lyme disease, and they get into your food, and you know all the things that mice do. I don't need to explain it, but it's a lot worse than having a snake in most cases when a mouse gets into your food or your pantry, right? But these snakes had gotten into the house, and they removed them. But her daughter was having nightmares and having a lot of anxiety because she was afraid there's these snakes in her house, and they're going to come get her while she's sleeping. So she couldn't sleep at night. I mean, it was very alarming, and I felt really, really bad for this family, and especially this little girl because, you know, who wants to be afraid in your own house, right? You know, except for my son, who I like to jump out and scare him sometimes. But you got to keep kids in check a little bit. You want to keep a little bit of fear in them, right? But we don't want to be afraid of snakes. So they came to me, and I said, why don't you bring them to the Wildlife Center? I'll give you a private little lesson on snakes, and I'll show you some of these animals, right, in person, and let you see them, touch them, so maybe I can take some of the fear away from her. Because one of the best things we could do to combat fear is education, right, and experience. So the more you see these things, the less you're afraid of them, right? So they came out. I showed them the snake, and her son and her daughter both really loved this milk snake, which I actually brought here, same milk snake, and showed them the snake, and they loved it, and they touched it, and I asked her how she felt before and after, which I always like to do, and maybe I'll ask you that too tonight. Who here is afraid of snakes at all, or doesn't like snakes, or maybe just a little uncomfortable around snakes? Anyone here? Okay, fair. Thank you for your honesty. Most of you here, you're probably here because you chose to willingly come here to see a snake. So I assume that wouldn't be you, but that's fine if you are. And actually, I respect a lot for those who don't like them as much, but then they're making a point to come learn more about them. That's really important. But I asked them before and after, and they definitely felt way more comfortable after they'd actually seen a snake up close. And it's not one that's on the ground and you're screaming because it's in your kitchen, right? It's one that's in a controlled setting. That's very important. So what I did, though, was observe the mother the whole time we were talking. So as I was showing the kids the snakes, I was watching her behavior, her body language, and things she was saying. And she's like, I just don't know why my daughter's so afraid of these snakes. And at the end of our meeting, I pulled her aside and said, it's you. She's afraid of them because of you. And she's like, really, me? I'm like, I didn't realize that. And I said, well, yeah, I'm watching you. I'm listening to what you're saying. And the things you're saying are all very negative. Like, oh, I'm afraid. Oh, it's going to bite me. Oh, and she kept like kind of recoiling every time the snake would do anything. And I said, you're making her afraid of them. And that's what a lot of us do unknowingly to our kids, or kids around us, or family members, whoever, is, we're kind of projecting our fear to them, whereas on their own, kids will not normally be afraid of these animals. They'll be curious about them. Now, of course, if you get bitten by a snake or something's biting you, anyone's going to be afraid. If a dog tries to bite you, you're going to be afraid of it, right? But just seeing the animal on its own does not necessarily strike fear in most people. Some people do have an inherent fear of them, like I said earlier. But so that was really important. So she goes, oh, I'm going to work on that. And I said, just watch your language, watch what you're saying around her, and it'll really change her perspective of them, because she's looking at you. I mean, you're her mom. She's going to, if you're afraid of it, that's telling her she should be afraid. That's how kids learn things, right? They learn it by seeing what their parents do. So I thought that was an important message for parents to think about too. And the same goes for spiders. So a lot of people like snakes, and like myself, I didn't like spiders for a long time, even though I loved snakes. And the way I got over that was I just spent a lot of time photographing them, looking at them really closely, and learning about them. And I said, wow, these are really beautiful. And the more I understood them, now I love seeing spiders. Like, I don't want one in my shirt, but if I see it out on a plant, I'm not going to be like afraid of it. If I see one in my house, I'll carry it outside. And that's kind of our rule in our house. It's just carry them outside. So the threats of snakes. So this is one of the things that I really wanted to talk about, was just all these things that snakes have kind of stacked against them. And one of the things, just like we hear a lot about turtles on the roads, but we don't hear as much about helping snakes cross the road. But it is a thing. We see them quite a bit, and I see a lot of dead snakes on the road. We have a lot less snakes here than some other place in the country, but I'll go down south, like North Carolina, Virginia, looking for snakes sometimes, because that's what we do for fun, right? And there's a lot more snakes on the road, and there's a lot more dead snakes on the road. So, and every time a snake dies on the road, that's one less snake that can eat things and can help contribute to the ecosystem, one less snake that can breed or lay eggs, create more snakes, do all those things that snakes need to do, or feed other animals, right? Because snakes are food for a lot of things, as we see here. So I always post this image every year, and I think it's interesting because, and I kind of say sometimes I was trying to use some sort of Big Lebowski quote, but I don't remember what it was. But sometimes you eat the snake, sometimes the snake eats you, right? So, and the idea was that, you see here, we heard a fledgling cardinal making a lot of ruckus up here, and all of a sudden I looked over and there was this rat snake climbing the tree coming after cardinal. And of course you're like, do we intervene? Do we stop it? But that's nature, right? That's what they do. Rat snakes in particular really do love eating eggs and birds. So you see this other one here. We had a bird nest on the barn of the Wildlife Center, and this little rat snake is poking its head out, licking its chops after just eating all the eggs. That's what they do. So next time, maybe build your nest a little higher or out of the way. So right. So that's one of the things that happens. And a lot of people on the birding pages will be like, if they see a snake in a bird box, they get really mad that how dare the snake eat a bird. It's like, well, that's what they do. And something has to eat the birds as well, right? That's how you control bird populations, just like things need to eat the snakes to control the snake populations, right? So here we have a red-shouldered hawk they're really good at hunting snakes. We see them a lot carrying snakes, in particular, red-shouldered hawks. And I think Cooper's hawks do it quite a bit too, if I remember correctly. But they're really good at flying through kind of real shrubby areas and under the canopy in a forest, and they'll grab a snake, and you'll just see a hawk with like a tail hanging down, and you're like, what is that? And it's like, oh, it's carrying a snake. But also you'll see some species, and I think this is a wren, I think this was the Carolina wren, but they'll use snake skins in their nest. And I believe it's theorized that they put the snake skin in there. Actually, the scent helps deter other predators, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the thought there was if you put the snake skin in the nest, it deters other predators from coming in to the nest to eat the eggs. So I always thought that was cool. So it's, it's that balance of nature, right? So this is kind of like a little rhyme we kind of think of when we're talking to people. So one of the things we tell people online on these, I hate even talking about it, but community pages, like the Nextdoor, like community pages, those types of things, that's where we're seeing a lot of the hatred towards snakes and a lot of misinformation about wildlife. Every house cat is a mountain lion, as you've probably seen. So we see that all the time. Every fox is rabid. Every coyote is eating everyone's cats and dogs and kids, and they're coming into your house and signing over the mortgage to your house to their coyote pack or whatever. The things that coyotes do, like, because they're just these devious animals that go around doing those things. But what we try to tell people is, if you don't want to handle a snake, you don't know how to ID it, you don't want it in your backyard, that's totally fine and understandable. But we tell people that you can manage your yard so that you're not attracting snakes. So if you have a fairly manicured yard, you're probably going to see a lot less snakes. If you have brush piles, lots of good native plants, the things that I do to attract them, right? But if you keep piles of things around, it's places for snakes to hide, so you're going to be more likely to see them. We also build our houses a lot on snake habitat. So these nice rock outcrops, I've had people with copperheads in their yard all the time. They literally built a house on a snake den. So the copperheads start living under like the driveway, and they bask on the driveway, which now kind of simulates the rock outcrops they would use and things. But you can spray a snake with a hose. So pretty simple. It sounds almost kind of ridiculous, but you literally can just spray them with a hose. So if you don't want to get close to them, instead of using a hoe instead of a shovel, but people take shovels and they chop their heads off because that's the easiest way to kill a snake for a lot of people. But if you spray them with a hose, they just get agitated and they leave because nothing wants to be sprayed with a hose, really. So that's a good way just to get them to kind of shoo away. And then we tell people that all the time. It's actually really effective. So, that's probably what we normally tell most people that don't like snakes because it's just easy. So I saw this, and I think this was, I like to give credit, and I forget who did it originally, but I want to say it's North Carolina Natural Resources page that posted this, but they didn't put their logo on it. So I just thought it was cool, like as a nice little saying for people. Just kind of encapsulates everything I just said, so I like that. It's one of our barn snakes. We just let them go, and they just help us control the mice, and we have a little ecosystem there. But every time we go to our barn, there's these little faces peeking out, and I have to make sure when I'm like opening the doors that I'm not gonna like catch one in the door or something. It's just kind of funny. You'll just see like their little bodies like kind of like in different spots and kind of peeking through the cracks of the boards. We did have to put up a little bit of a tarp in the peak of the ceiling because their feces was dropping down, and it had about a 30-foot drop. So, when you drop something from really high, kind of what happens when it hits. So pretty disgusting. So we have a kind of a snake catcher up there. Helps out a little bit. So here's a couple of the rescues we've done with snakes over the years. I think this was last year or within the 10-year COVID period that we had. So we had a areaway drain at a local church, and they said, hey, we have a snake stuck in a drain. And I was like, okay, just whatever. It's stuck in the drain. How is that possible? And sure enough, it had gotten into like one of the holes in this like thick galvanized metal drain cover. And I had to go in with tools and remove the drain cover and then clip enough of the grate to kind of peel it back. And surprisingly, it wasn't really injured. I mean, it had some scales that were kind of ripped up, but I just let it go. I didn't want to stress it out any more than it already was. I've been thrashing around for a while, but it seemed in pretty good shape, so I actually was able to free it. So that was a success. And I'm really glad they called us too, because most people just killed it. Said, "Oh, there's a snake here, let's just kill it." But they actually thought to call us, which I thought was really, really cool of them. This is something we did way back when we started, but I made this little educational piece because unfortunately a lot of snakes get tangled in that erosion netting, grass, the sod, the little plastic netting that comes in sod when you buy it a lot of times. And we've gotten so many calls over the years for this stuff. So that rat snake, we were able to cut it out of there. We educated the family that found it, and we let the kids hold the snake, and then we released it. So we've done this over and over again. So this one was the protective netting over a koi pond to keep herons out, which sounds great because, hey, I got fish, I want to keep herons out. We've had a lot of wildlife get caught in this stuff. It's really bad. We've had owls stuck in some of this kind of netting, barred owls that were hunting frogs. They'll come down, they'll get stuck in this stuff, and it's really hard to get them out. So, of course, as they get stuck, you can see their scales, you know, how roughed up they got. Because, I mean, the snake's thrashing, trying to free itself, and as it thrashes, it gets more and more tangled. So that's a big problem for these guys. So we kind of tell people, like, you know, hey, just try not to use this stuff. It's just not, it's not good. It's just going to cause problems. And herons can get stuck in it too. It's not like if you're trying to prevent herons, you know, they're still going to come down looking for the fish, and they're just going to peck their giant beaks through it and then get all tangled, and then you got a bigger problem. So you can make your ponds deeper. You can create places to hide for your fish. Makes it harder for the herons to get to the fish. Some people use those fake herons. You can try to use those sometimes. There's another heron there. They tend to not want to come there. You know, or not just put out food for wildlife. That's also another option. So if you're going to put a pond in your backyard, just assume there's going to be some tribute of your fish that are going to go to the wildlife, you know, if you're going to put it out there. Here's another one with the snake selfie. Garter snake, same thing. There was this sod netting, was like the grass had already grown over it, but snakes are going into the grass, once again, getting all tangled in it. Have to get them out. Of course, they're not happy when you're doing this, so they're striking at you and musking all over the place, which is my favorite. But this was an interesting one. So this one, we had a call in a neighborhood that said, hey, we have a copperhead that's stuck in erosion netting. I said, okay, it's not a copperhead. I'm sure it's just a harmless, you know, juvenile rat snake or milk snake or something. And then I said, can you send me a photo? And they sent me a photo, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's a copperhead. I said, yeah, you're right. Sorry, I don't mean to doubt you, but 9 times out of 10, it's not a copperhead. But this time it was. So what we had to do was, luckily we had this stuff already. So we have a captive copperhead that'll be part of our exhibits for our wildlife center. And we actually tubed the snake. So that is using this plastic tubing. There's different sizes, and you can kind of pick the size based on the size of the snake. And we had to, we held it down with a tong, you know, so we could kind of secure the snake so that it wouldn't be able to strike. And then we kind of give the tube here, and we kind of just let the snake kind of work its way into the tube. And once it gets far enough into the tube, and we're trained to do this, by the way. This isn't something, don't ever do this just on your own, just for fun. But the snake gets far enough in there, it can't turn. So once it's far enough into the tube, it's safe. We could handle the snake. So we had one person holding the tube with the snake in it, and then I came in behind, and I was cutting all the netting off. So that way the head was secure. We're not trying to go out there and save wildlife by going to the hospital ourselves, right? So, and a copperhead bite will send you to the hospital. It'll ruin your day. It will not kill you for most people. So that doesn't mean it's not serious. We don't want to go to the hospital. And the antivenom is very, very expensive. Like tens of thousands of dollars expensive. So you don't want to do it. You don't want to play with that. So, but the good news is it's probably not going to kill you. So it's the amount of fear compared to other things out there is perhaps unjustified. But luckily we have the tools to do this kind of stuff. So when we got the call, they called the right people. We came out. We took care of it. We relocated this snake in this case because it was a venomous snake, and we took it down in the same watershed always. We always want to keep them in the same ecosystem, but we took it away from the neighborhood. We're not going to like release it back to someone's backyard. That's just not a good idea. So that's what we tell people as well. If you're in like southern Maryland, for instance, there's a lot more copperheads or out in the mountains than we have here in the central part of Maryland. So Copperheads are in a lot of people's neighborhoods, so we tell people, you can push them into a large container, a trash can, a bin, take them down to the wooded lot, like down the other end of the neighborhood, away from people's houses, that sort of thing is a good way to do it, just to get it out of your general vicinity. So here's something I always like to talk about because we have a lot of species that are misidentified. So one of which is this myth that I'm sure all of you have heard over the years, which is the Maryland cottonmouth, right? The Maryland water moccasin. So we started doing some education around this because a lot of people would say to us, oh yeah, I've seen cottonmouths, they're here. And I said, well, do you have a photo? And somehow it's one of these species that's very common, yet no one's ever taken a photo of them. It's quite amazing, actually. Everybody just forgets that they have a camera in their pocket at all times, right? So I've never seen a photo of a Maryland cottonmouth or water moccasin, but everyone's uncle that used to work for DNR says that they're here. So one of the things is that we have snakes that can swim. So I always like to say, well, all snakes can really swim. I've seen most species that we have swimming at some point. If you take any snake and drop it in water, it can swim. It doesn't mean it's going to go underwater and hunt fish or anything, but they can swim. So they'll swim if they need to cross a creek or a pond or a lake or anything like that. There's the thing about the shape and the markings, the eye shape. So this is a little bit tricky, and we talk about this a lot with copperheads. The eye shape is not a great way to identify venomous snakes because their pupils can dilate. So a lot of people say if it has a vertical pupil, it's venomous. Now that is true, but and you can see kind of this vertical little slit here, and like a northern water snake will have like literally a dot, like a circular dot in their eye, and our other non-venomous snakes. But if that vertical pupil is dilated, all of a sudden it's round. You go, oh, I can pick this up. It's not vertical. So you got to look at all these different identifying markings together. You can't just look at one thing. The other thing that's very common is the head shape. So you can look at one snake and see more of a triangular head. That is true for our venomous species that we have, which are timber rattlesnakes, copperheads, and then further south, which I'm alluding to, is the cottonmouth. So they do have these very triangular heads, but the problem is a lot of our non-venomous species also can flatten their heads in certain situations. So you'll see a garter snake will flatten its head out and look very triangular. You'll see hognose snakes, which have a very triangular head. So a lot of people misidentify these species for venomous and kill them, because if that's all you're looking for is a triangle, a lot of species could end up being in that classification. This is a really good one. If you do see a juvenile of the species, and you all can come up and look at these at the end, but like a juvenile copperhead or cottonmouth will have this little yellow tail tip. I'm trying not to make you run the camera back and forth. But a little baby copperhead will have this little yellow tail tip, and they actually use it as a lure. So they'll move their tail, and it helps get things like frogs to be interested in them, come a little closer maybe, and then they can strike. So it's a really cool little lure that they have. So you'll see this in cottonmouths and copperheads. So I think that's pretty cool. If you see a little baby snake, especially for kids, you see a baby snake and you think it's safe to pick up because it's a baby. Copperhead babies are just as venomous as the adults. They are not more venomous than adults. So that's a myth that a lot of people, I'm sure, have heard over the years, and I used to tell it all the time, was, well, they can't control their venom, so it's more dangerous to get bit by a young copperhead or a cottonmouth or whatever than an adult. But it's actually, it's the same. So the adults have more venom because they're bigger. The young ones may be more likely to bite just because they don't have other defenses. They're a little more exposed to predators, being a small animal, than a larger one. But it's not necessarily more or less, so in that sense. So I think that's pretty interesting. And one of the things that, just to repeat again, if you're not sure, don't pick it up. And I want to be very clear to all the kids in the room. And I want you to promise me. So I want you all to nod when I'm done saying this, if you agree. Never, ever, 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 ever pick up a snake unless you have an adult that says it's okay. Okay? Promise? Okay, even if you love snakes and you're pretty good at identifying them, make sure a grown-up can tell you, yes, that's okay to pick that up. Because even I have misidentified things after knowing about snakes for a long time. So you always got to be super careful, and a lot of snakes can trick you. There's pictures, I didn't put them in this PowerPoint, but there have been copperheads that have not had any markings on them. Like completely like brown, just straight brown, no markings. So that happens in nature sometimes. So if you don't know all the different things, you go, nope, I know copperheads have this special marking, which we'll talk about, and one doesn't, and you go, nope, it's okay to pick it up. It's just solid brown. You get bitten, you're going to the hospital, right? No one wants to go to the hospital unless you have a baby being born. That's kind of cool. So just never pick up snakes unless someone tells you it's okay. And you back there too. No picking up snakes unless an adult says it's okay. So the biggest thing about cottonmouths, and once again, here's a cottonmouth, and here's a northern water snake. So they look very different. Cottonmouths are very thick-bodied animals. They do have similar markings. I mean, if you're just looking at a snake moving real quick through the water, I definitely understand why people misidentify them. It's very understandable. But the biggest thing that we can do with a lot of these species is when we're learning about wildlife is learn where they actually live. Same thing with people that see cougars all the time. You know, well, this is a cougar because I saw something and it looked like a cat, so it's a cougar. And I'm like, well, there's more that goes into natural history than just something exists somewhere in the world and I saw something, therefore it must be that. You have to think about, like, where do these animals live? Like, you know, if you see a deer crossing the road, you're like, oh, that was an elk. Well, do elk live here? I don't think it was an elk. I think it was probably a white-tailed deer, you know. So for some reason, we do that a lot, especially with snakes. So if you look at the range map of our water snake species, it's pretty wide, and they're very much a northeast and Great Lakes and Midwestern species. If you look at the range of the cottonmouth or water moccasin, both names are the same, the furthest north they go is southeast Virginia. So I think it's like the James River, more or less, is kind of the top end of where they're found, which is pretty far from here, right? It's not like they're in the Potomac, and it's like, okay, it's just got to swim across the Potomac, and they're here. Like our rainbow snakes and some other species that are kind of a southern species, but they're right on the edge of the state line. They're pretty far south. So as of today, which climate change, who knows what will happen one day, as of today, there's not been a confirmed case of a naturally occurring cottonmouth or water moccasin in Maryland. Now, could one still weigh on a boat? Could one be sold in a plant or something like that, which you've probably seen those photos go around with someone found an eastern diamondback rattlesnake in a plant, watch out at your nursery, and they just like plug in different cities every time that meme goes around and gets shared. But it can happen. So I never say never, but they're not found here. That's not part of their range. So that's very important to understand. We're still okay on time? Cool. So here's a little bit about our copperhead research. So I really like to talk about these guys because this is our most common and in most cases in Maryland our only venomous snake. The timber rattlesnake is found currently in western Maryland from like Frederick west. There was a population in northern Baltimore County not that long ago, a few decades ago, was the last one seen. And they used to occur across Maryland, lots of parts of Maryland. When all the deforestation happened and settlement occurred, things like that, most of the rattlesnakes were killed off. The ones that kind of got banished to the high ridges and rock outcrops of the mountains are the ones that survived. So the snakes we have today in Maryland are those timber rattlesnakes in the mountains, essentially is the way to think about it. And then copperheads are found through most of the rest of Maryland, though, including the mountains, but also somewhat in the Piedmont, different spots. There's little hot spots of them, parts of the eastern shore, and then southern Maryland, they seem to be pretty numerous. So they are easily identified by one thing. And also, just for those that don't know, I've been saying venomous a lot. So you will see even natural history publications calling them poisonous. Does anyone know the difference between poisonous and venomous? I knew you kids would know. Go ahead. Excellent answer. Couldn't have said it better myself. So venom is injected, for those that didn't hear. Poison is ingested. So there are some snakes that are poisonous, but and as far as North America goes, these are venom is injected, like spiders, bees, things like that. So when you call it poisonous, they do have poison venom. So it's a gray area where you'll see people use it in different ways, but that's the proper way to say it. So you don't have to be a jerk about it when someone says it at a party. You don't have to like slap them and say that they're wrong or anything like that. But be nice about it. But it's nice to use the proper terminology when we can, right? So I showed you the baby already, but you can see in this model of a copperhead that we have here that'll be part of our exhibits at our wildlife center, they have what we like to call Hershey kiss markings. And I like bringing this stuffed animal one because you can kind of see it a little better. But these Hershey kiss markings on this copperhead, it's a really good way to identify them. If you look at a water snake, which is the most commonly misidentified species that people call copperheads, it has what I like to call more of like a saddle. So see how the blotch gets really wide at its spine? So like a saddle, and then it gets kind of narrow like the saddle, like the straps of the saddle come around their belly. That's what the water snake's markings look like. Whereas the copperhead has this Hershey kiss. So that's a good way to identify them. They do have like a copper head. That's, as you can imagine, how they got their name, right? So their head typically, and they can vary in color too. And that's the thing that's really tough for people is that they, these animals, you look at a field guide and you go, ah, it's this color. Well, they only had room for the one photo or the one illustration of that animal. But they can vary a lot. You'll see with these photos. They can be really dark, really light. So you can't just go by color. This is not a good way to do it. They could be shedding. There's all those sorts of things going on. So our research was, I already talked about some of these myths. So our research was kind of spurred by the idea that copperheads are very likely to bite you. They're trying to bite you. They're after you. And our research has been somewhat misinterpreted by some to say that they will not strike you if we say that they're unlikely to strike. But our idea was to prove what we kind of knew and thought in a scientific way, that how likely is a copperhead to strike in a normal situation where you'd encounter one. Now, if one's like in a bucket in your backyard and you're reaching into it, the snake doesn't have any other options, right? If you're hiking down a trail and a copperhead's on the side of the trail and you're walking past it, that's what we were trying to simulate with this project. So some of the myths, other than they'll chase you, right? That's a big thing with cottonmouths, that they just chase you. Like you're walking in the woods and they're just like, oh, there's a human, I'm going to come get it. Also, they smell like cucumbers. I've been hearing that my whole life. I've never seen any actual evidence of it, and we've been around hundreds of copperheads over the years. I've never smelled cucumbers around them. I have to believe that there's probably, and I've smelled their musk and other things. That's what you would think maybe would cause that. And we have a captive one, so we're like smelling it within like a couple feet. It's in a cage, right, in a protected environment. So I have to think that there's probably a plant that was often found around copperhead dens or something that smelled reminiscent of a cucumber maybe, and then people would correlate that, say, hey, you kind of smell cucumbers, you might be near a copperhead den. That's the only thing I can think. I haven't seen any research one way or the other, but that they're aggressive. So like I said, they're going to come after you. Question mark. So we wanted to see that in this kind of like a very tight method, that we're going to go out and we're going to do the same thing to every snake we found. And we wanted to simulate this in the wild with in a safe way. So of course we got a permit to do this from our friends at Maryland Department of Natural Resource. And to go out and do research, first of all, we have to ensure we're doing no harm. And I know I'm holding a weapon as I'm saying this, but we wanted to do no harm to these snakes. So the idea was to go out, instead of actually stepping on the snakes, we also don't want to get bitten, right? So we put a boot on a stick. It's very fancy scientific stuff here. So we put a boot on a stick, and then we used a set of tongs with a glove on it to simulate grabbing a snake and to simulate stepping on a snake. So we had to first of all go out and find these darn things, which, can anyone find the snake here? Can anyone see? I know it's hard to see on a projector anyways. You want to try? Yeah, you can come up. Sure. I don't know if this works. Does this work? No. Oh, the whole thing's dead. You're good. Congrats. You get a free sticker for that one. So the snake is here. I like using a snake hook as a pointer. I feel very powerful. So they're very hard to find. So that was our biggest challenge of this study, was actually finding these things. Even though we knew where they were, we'd already found dens before. We knew the records of the snakes. We've gone out and found them previously. These snakes are really, really hard to find. That's kind of their superpower, right? They're really good at camouflaging. They blend in with leaves. They hide in leaf litter. You have likely walked past many copperheads in your life and never seen them. I guarantee it, if you go out and hike a good bit. Because that's how they not only hide from predators, but that's actually how they catch their prey. So they are ambush predators. So this species likes to not so much hunt their food, but they sit around and wait for their food to come past them. Mice, frogs, things like that, other rodents. Can anyone find the copperhead here? I feel like this one's hard. Okay, I see it. I had to remind myself where it was. Does anyone see it? On the right, yeah, so thank you. So right there. Pretty amazing though, right? I mean, that's like, and if you're not looking for that thing, and we were looking hard, and we still were having trouble finding them. So if you're just walking, you can definitely miss that snake, right? So here's a little bit of the methods, as I was telling you earlier. So find the snake. We get a temperature reading just to see what the temperature is of the snake. So if it's out in the sun, how hot the snake is could determine whether it would strike or not as well, because they're, ectothermic, which is cold-blooded, ectothermic. So, the hotter it gets, the more the snake can move, right? And then we'd step on it. So now, of course, we're doing this lightly. We're not going to hurt the snake, but we'd apply just a slight amount of pressure on the snake, and then record what it does. Does it strike? Does it rattle its tail? Because actually, most snakes will actually rattle their tails, and besides rattlesnakes. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize. They hear a snake rattling its tail and they assume it's a rattlesnake. There's some thought that rattlesnakes evolved the rattle because rattlesnakes were found more in open prairie and grasslands. So they didn't have the leaf litter to make the vibration of their tail actually work. But other snakes that were found in forested areas, like rat snakes, black rat snakes, do it all the time. So or milk snakes, a lot of species, king snakes, they'll buzz their tail in the leaves, and it sounds pretty loud because they're hitting all these other things, objects around them, and it makes it sound kind of loud and saying, hey, don't step here, I'm going to bite you, or, so listen, I'm here, kind of thing. So we apply light pressure and then record what it does. And if it doesn't do anything, if it doesn't strike, it doesn't flee, it doesn't rattle its tail, we would actually try to pick it up. Once again, record what it does. Does it strike? Does it do nothing? And then we just let it go, and that's it. We don't do anything else to it. So you see how we just put a glove on a tongue. So some folks did ask, okay, so that's a piece of metal with a glove on it. That's not the same as a human, and these animals use heat to find their prey. So that's a valid concern and question. We did simulate another study that did the same thing with cottonmouths. So we were following an existing study that was published down south, but we often would take temperature readings of our boot and our other objects that we'd kind of have in our pack. We'd leave them sitting out on our packs. So they were the same ambient temperature as the boots we were wearing. It wasn't like, oh, the human booted foot here is like 97 degrees and the one in our backpack was like 80 degrees. So even though we're inside of the boots, there wasn't like a whole lot of thermal transfer there either. And if something's coming at these snakes, if you take this and you start poking a snake with it, it's just a piece of metal, they're going to strike at it still. They're not like, wait a second, you don't have warm blood, I'm not going to strike that. If something's coming at them, they're still going to try to strike and defend themselves. So that's what we found. And so we felt it was pretty solid in that way too. But it's a valid question. It's a good way of thinking. So here is the results of our study. So this was a published study in Acta Herpetologica in, I don't even remember when it was now, but 2020. So, and these are our co-authors. We had many folks helping out with this. Andy Adams led the study with John Garrison, Emily Boucher, and Hunter Howell. So we were the lead researchers on this, and we all worked together to put out this publication so that we could kind of share this and help use it as a reference for people that say these animals are trying to strike us or out to get us or very likely to strike you no matter what. If you're around copperheads, you're going to get bitten. So out of 69 snakes that we found, so almost 70, we only had 2 strike at our experimental boot glove combo. Now, most of them didn't do anything. So benign response. So they either fleed, and most of the snakes I found fleed. If they did nothing, they would just get away. So if they have somewhere to hide, they will hide. That's their main goal, is to get away from the predator and be safe. Most of them did that. Other ones just sat there. They're like, hey, I'm not anything. I'm just going to sit here and do nothing so that I don't give away my position. So a lot of snakes would do that, which I thought was really interesting. That was more than I thought it would be. And like I said, there was one, I think, that we walked up on. It just struck. We weren't even close to it. Just like, hey, and just like struck. So we had to count that. But so they were very unlikely to strike. So once again, if you're hiking and you're just walking past a copperhead, the chance of it striking is very low. Doesn't mean it won't happen. Every year people get bitten by copperheads. I'm not saying that they will not bite you. They certainly will, and they do in certain situations. It seems like more likely, we didn't do another experiment to prove this, but my understanding and theory is that if they're in your yard and they're more in a stressed out environment where they're not near cover, they're not near rock outcrops, they're not near a den, they're kind of out in the open, they're way more likely to strike because they don't have another option. So snakes, I always like to say that their venom is like arrows in a quiver, right? So they use their venom for their food. So that's their way of hunting. So they need their venom to strike an animal, to kill it, to eat it, right? So they don't want to waste that. It's very precious to them. Venom is very complex, and it takes a lot of energy to make venom for a snake. So they don't want to waste it. They don't want to just be throwing it all around town, right? They want to save it for those situations where they really need it for their food. I think this is kind of the end of this, and I'm going to show you some live snakes for those in the room so you can actually touch and see one. This is a 2-headed water snake that was brought to us. That was really cool. It lived for like 2 weeks. It was really sad. We have it in a jar now, unfortunately, but they're really hard to keep alive because their internal organs are shared, and it was really hard to get it to eat. But it was really cool. This happens once in a while, right? I thought it was really, really cute and sad, too, at the same time. Here's some of our merch. We sell a bunch of this, like T-shirts and stuff if you're interested, mugs and totes and all that fun stuff. I have stickers for y'all tonight for coming out. And this is some of our social media stuff. But let me go ahead and show you some of our models real quick, and I'll bring out the live snakes. I just wanted to show you a couple other species we have around here just for diversity's sake, so you can see. So this is a rough green snake. I should ask you guys, because you probably know, right? So rough green snake, I'll start with that one. These are mostly insect eaters, mostly in the coastal plain. Very small. They'll climb trees. They're more arboreal. This one, extra points for this one. This is a really cool one. It's one of my favorites. Do you know in the back? I haven't heard from you yet. Awesome. Good job. What's their main prey item? Okay, it's okay. They're good. Anyone else know what it is? Good. Awesome. Crayfish. What phase of crayfish? I'm going hard here. So molting. Yeah. So crayfish that are shedding their shells. So they're a little more soft. So they very much a specialist. So these are found mostly I find them in some tidal areas too, but mostly like kind of clean, kind of streams with lots of crayfish. This one, kind of easy, I think. Garter, good job. It's an eastern garter snake. So that's okay. Don't worry about it. There's another snake that looks similar to this. What's the one that's kind of confused for this? It looks very similar. That also has a yellow stripe. Ribbon snake. Very good. Awesome. So the garter snake, you can tell from the ribbon snake, typically because it has this checkered pattern as well. So the ribbon snake will have the similar yellow stripes on it, but it'll be a little more slender, and it won't have that checkered pattern on it. But the Decay's brown snake also has a checkered pattern. So you have to really look for those stripes. You know this one, right? Remember, right? Copperhead. How about this one? This is my favorite snake. Anyone else that we haven't heard from yet? Good. Awesome. Hognose. So what's special about the hognose snake? Awesome. What else do they do? Do you know anything else? Okay. Any other behaviors they do that's really special? Yep. So they mostly eat toads. We call them toad poppers. They have these rear fangs. Um, so they'll spread their hood like a cobra as one of their defense. They will rattle their tail, like I said, other non-venomous snakes will do, and they will play dead. Play possum, right? So they'll flip over. They'll actually, what else they do? Do you know? They twitch, yeah. Yeah, they'll kind of thrash around. Do they make any sounds? Yeah, yeah, they will do that. So they actually will hiss. So I've seen them. They actually like when they kind of play dead, they'll hiss and they do all kinds of things. People call them puff adders and all kinds of stuff. So they can be all sorts of colors. There. Once again, that's why you can't always look at coloration. I've seen these completely black, melanistic, where it almost looks like a rat snake, but it's kind of thicker. But they can be orange. I've seen them that were like pink. They're really beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful snakes. Definitely my favorite, just because they're so interesting. We find most of them around like sandy soiled areas. They like places that there's toads. They like to go into the soil. But randomly you'll find them in places where there's just like a lot of leaves. They'll be up in the mountains sometimes around some of the timber rattlesnake dens. So they're kind of all over the place. But yeah, let's get out some real snakes. I have to do these in a certain order for a reason. So, okay. I'll tell you why. Do you guys keep snakes in your pillowcases at home? Does everybody have a snake? Keeps you company when you're sleeping? Oh, in the tanks. Oh, that's weird. Don't bite me. So can you tell me what kind of animals can bite? Anything with a mouth. That's my favorite saying. So people always ask, will that bite? I'm like, does it have a mouth? I mean, a lot of you probably have friends that bite and stuff too that shouldn't, right? Okay. Let him calm down a little bit. He doesn't musk on me. The snake is fairly new to us, so he's still getting a little used to people. Be calm here. I will let you all touch him. He's starting to shed. Normally don't like to bring them out when they're kind of shedding because they're a little bit more scared, I think. It's harder for them to see. But he's growing a lot, so he's kind of shedding all the time, so I was kind of like, Does anyone know the species? In the back? King snake. Very good. Eastern king snake. So these are more common in southern Maryland, Eastern Shore. But we do have some records up here in Baltimore and Harford County. They're pretty uncommon up this way, but they are around. What is their superpower? What is their thing that they do that kind of makes them special? There's some other snakes do this too, but makes them particularly special. Yeah, they do. They eat other snakes. So that's the reason I brought him out first, because I have another snake, and if I smell too much like another snake, he might take a little taste of me. I look like a little snake chicken nugget. So do you all want to touch him? Okay, so I'm fine with you touching him. Two rules. One is use two fingers. I'm going to hold his head, his or her head, I don't know. So you touch the body. The other is you have to wash your hands, okay? Reptiles can carry diseases, so before you put your hands in your mouth, before you do anything like that. Do you guys have hand sanitizer? Oh, perfect. So please, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so before you do anything, before you touch your water bottle, before you do any of that, please wash your hands. So sanitize your hands. So I'm going to try to get his body away from his head, but he's kind of like in the... So some people call these chain king snakes too, because they kind of this chain pattern. This species has some subspecies across the U.S. Thank you. One thing that's really cool, I think, about these is if you go to different parts of the country too, you'll get these color morphs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. On the Outer Banks of North Carolina, there's it used to be called a subspecies, but now I think they found it's the same species, but just a morph. There's an Outer Banks morph of this species it's actually more white than black. It's like its colors are flipped, and they're really pretty. It's really interesting. Have you seen any near your house before? Okay. There's some down there. So people see them once in a while. I'll come back around. Oh, really? Awesome. Hold on, let me grab his head. Sorry. He flipped around a little bit. Don't bite me. And their bites don't really hurt that much. It's just, not pleasant. I don't like when they bite me. Did you want to touch? Sure. Thank you. And these are constrictors, just like a lot of other snakes we have. I'm just waiting for them to poop. That's normally what they do when I have these programs. Did you want to touch them? Okay. I'm sorry if I just put them in your face if you don't want to touch them. I try to ask because some people are like, no, I don't want. I'm like, oh, sorry. I'm presuming because you're here that you might want to see the snakes up close. Let me kind of rotate him around. Some warm, he probably just, I'm not a threat to the snake. They're pretty used to us. So they might still bite. There's nothing saying that they won't. But they, after a while, they kind of see, I like your shirt. So we haven't brought the snake out much. Did you want to touch him? Cool. Yeah, awesome. So one of the things I always tell people that haven't touched a snake, don't put it in your mouth. Did she want to or you want to keep it? It's okay. No problem. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no worries. People think they're slimy. They look kind of shiny and slimy, but they're not at all. So, salamanders are slimy. Frogs, but they're just smooth and they're strong. You can feel the strength of their muscles. Snakes can, oh yeah, sure. So they can climb into a lot of really tight spaces to hunt. Okay, so that's our king snake. His name is Elvis, by the way, the king. Okay, last one. So this one's pretty special. And so one thing I didn't talk about that's relevant to some of these species, really any reptile, is the issue of poaching. So that means it's people taking animals out of the wild that are protected illegally and trying to sell them. So there's nothing wrong with having a pet snake, being a snake breeder. I know some of you have snakes, breed snakes, sell snakes. That's totally fine as long as you're following the law. I will say we advocate against taking anything from the wild, even if it's legal, to take it from the wild. I know they had to be taken at some point, but we like to try to say just keep the ecosystems intact, let them do their thing in the wild. This particular snake was actually part of a multi-state poaching bust. A gentleman had gone to a state forest in Maryland and actually took this snake and others and went to another state and was selling them. Because this is considered a coastal plain milk snake. So it's probably the same species as the eastern milk snake, which we also have, the eastern milk snake. But what happens is when they get into the coastal plain, people used to think that they were kind of a hybrid between the scarlet king snake and the eastern milk snake. I believe genetics now are kind of leaning towards it's the same species. It just has like a color morph when they're in the coastal plain. They do use some different habitat when they're in the coastal plain compared to like the Piedmont mountains though. So that's why I'm always a little bit, when you get into the genetic species kind of stuff, like copperheads, there used to be a southern and northern copperhead. Now they're all just kind of considered the eastern copperhead. But when you find copperheads in the south, their dens tend to be like in root masses. They're found in more open areas and swamps. The ones in the north, they hibernate in these giant rock outcrops. So they have totally different kind of behaviors and habitat uses. So it's always interesting when they get lumped together as one species, and they look different, so that's always something that is very interesting to me. But so the coastal plain milk snake typically has more brighter white, more red. And this isn't like the best looking individual as far as, no offense, sorry. Um, this is a very beautiful snake. It's very beautiful, don't get me wrong. But I've seen ones that are just have crazy patterns, right? Just really beautiful, really bold white and really bright reds. The eastern milk snake will be very bright red when it's young. As they get older, they tend to get more dull, but the coastal plain milk snake will kind of retain those really bright red colors longer. But we were given the snake as part of the confiscation because they couldn't release it back in the wild. And that's the problem with poaching. It was exposed to other snakes, so there's a chance of disease spread if we were to release it back into the wild. Let me grab the head so you can touch it. So this snake is destined to be in an aquarium the rest of its life because it was taken. So once again, there's breeders out there. If people are breeding them and selling them, no problem there. But we don't want to see people going out. Because what happens is a lot of people, they'll go out and they'll take every single one, and then there's none left, right? So, and I think there's some talk of, these, even if it's the same species, this is a unique color morph for Maryland, right? So there's different counties in Maryland actually that are kind of known for different colors of this species too. Like there's a St. Mary's County phase, like there's a, you might know, anyone that breeds snakes, these are on the market as kind of labeled as different, from different regions, and different colors bring different amounts of money, and so that's the problem with these things. There's an incentive for people to take them out of the wild. So we don't want to see that happening, and that's part of our natural heritage, right? So if we live in Maryland, like we want there to always be that color morph, that genetic, whatever happened in those genetics that made it special, we want to see that exist out in the wild, right? We don't want to see them in pet stores or people's houses, right? We want them out in the wild too. So does anyone know why they're called milk snakes? This is one of my favorite things. I think we named this one Bessie for that reason. Anyone know why they're called milk snakes? It's a really funny myth. Go ahead. Yeah. So farmers used to think that they were milking cows because they'd always find them in barns. Why were they in barns? What the heck could be in a barn that a snake would want? Yeah, good. Yeah, mice, all sorts of prey, right? So they're good to have around for that reason. So we do find them a lot in agriculture areas. We have some milk snakes at our property on the Wildlife Center. We find them once in a while. We have some we like to call chocolate milk. We have these brown ones that show up sometimes. They're really pretty. So they can be all sorts of different colors. That's, once again, that makes it interesting because you're like, why would this snake, why would this snake kind of be all these different colors, and it makes it hard to identify them if you're just looking at a field guide, but they can vary quite a bit. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, they're cool though. Yeah, you see them for sale and stuff. Once again, like people breed them, and like as long as they're reputable. Yeah. Well, you can't sell in Maryland anyways. You can't sell native stuff in Maryland, so that's probably. But I've seen them online and stuff. People do. But yeah, he got caught. So the Natural Resources Police look out for that kind of stuff. And the guy was also selling Outer Banks king snakes and these like special snakes. We used to call them designer snakes because that's a lot of the pet trade got really, certain. The original albino Burmese pythons, you want to brought, like, if you ever read the book Lizard King, it's kind of the famous book about the poaching rings and the pet trade, and you'll see how much money, in the old days, like a Burmese python, it was actually albino. They were bringing like tens of thousands of dollars, and it was like they were being sold along with drugs and illegal firearms, and it was like this whole crazy, I was hoping to make a movie of it one day because it'd be a pretty interesting movie, but you see how much, you can wipe out an ecosystem of a lot of these species. Like the indigo snake was a popular one that used to be poached down south, and now they're an endangered species because their population between habitat loss and everything else. And it's so weird seeing them in the pillowcase. Super creepy. Actually, where's that hand sanitizer? I was gonna grab some before I touch anything else. Okay, great. Yeah, and Maryland DNR has a page for it, so yeah. And I always tell people, like especially turtles, like the Mid-Atlantic Turtle and Tourist Society, they have a lot of turtles that they have that need to be adopted out. So, if you want a turtle, like learn about how to keep them and do the homework. It's a lot of work. Trust me, we have a lot of animals at our wildlife center. It's a lot of work. Specialized food, specialized lighting, large tanks, much larger than you think. Turtles need a lot of filtration. It's expensive to keep them. Vitamins, vet care, all that stuff. But people used to buy them like little turtles in the Woolworths or whatever, and they didn't realize that they got this big and they lived for like 60 years. So they thought they're just buying it like a goldfish and it would die in a year or two. They're pretty resilient animals, and it takes a lot of care. But that's also to be said, it's nice to enjoy them. We understand why people want them because they're amazing creatures. It's cool to see them up close. But we hope that our wildlife center, that'll be a place where you can come see these animals, and then better yet, see them in the wild, right? And a lot of people have kind of taken this, hands-off nature approach these days and treat nature like it's this fragile thing that we're going to go out and break. I don't believe that, and we don't teach that in our organization. We like to see kids out there. We want you guys going out and catching frogs. Be respectful of them. Be kind to them. Let them go. Make sure your hands are clean. Don't put any chemicals on the frogs. Don't touch everything you see. If you see a salamander, maybe you can hold one time. Make sure your hands are wet, and then let it go right back where you found it. Put the logs back once you roll them. Those sorts of things are just really good. Good. Don't go around like some of these people online that go into a timber rattlesnake den. They start digging them out of the rocks and hurting these animals when they're trying to breed or trying to take care of their babies or give birth to their babies. And just be respectful, but also go out and enjoy them. Take pictures, see them in person, because the more we see these things and care about them, I feel like the longer they'll be able to stick around so we can all enjoy them, right? So, get out there. Does anyone have any questions for me? I know we're about ready on time, so go ahead. They are, thank you, that's a great question. I believe both of these, are they live bearing? I believe these lay eggs. You may have stumped me, because it's like 50-50 with these snakes. So I know, copperheads are live bears. I know like the Case brown snakes give live birth. I know rat snakes lay eggs and racers. Garter snakes give live birth. The rodeo, yeah. So the water snakes give live birth. So yeah, I don't remember if these. I think king snakes do lay eggs. Yeah, they do. Okay. Yeah. So king snakes and milk snakes are related too. So yeah, I think they both lay eggs. So when snakes lay eggs, it's interesting. So they don't guard their. They may hang around their eggs sometimes. I have seen them kind of around, but they don't take care of the babies. But they will kind of hang around them for a while. Like rattlesnake dens, you'll see the parents around the babies. So it's like they do have some kind of maternal, kind of guarding kind of thing going on a little bit sometimes. But when they kind of hatch, they're kind of on their own, So they're able to eat and everything. They don't feed them like a bird, or anything like that. But the snakes will lay their eggs a lot of times in rotting logs. You'll see rat snakes will lay their eggs in mulch piles sometimes. People find them. I've rolled logs over and found a racer nest underneath a log, and they'll hatch out under there. So we don't find them much though. You don't find them out there laying eggs much. You don't see them that much. So, but they're out there, So great questions. Any other ones? Any other ones? Good. I answered every question you have. That's amazing. Thank you. You're all really good. So I'm really impressed, especially you young ones. Good. Yeah, within reason. So I mean, what we don't want to do is, we don't want to be sanitizing our hand between every animal we touch, because then we're touching in the wild. Amphibians are very sensitive, especially. So we don't want to be touching amphibians with all this lotions, and so if you've got all that on your hand, just don't touch them at all. When we pick up salamanders, when we're doing a program with kids, we'll wet our hands in the water that's there. But for instance, there's things like ranavirus that are affecting a lot of turtles and frogs, in particular. But we don't want to go from one wetland and then go to another and be mixing animals and things like that. But if they're in a system where they're all there and they can all move freely between them, it's okay. But when we go to different sites, when we were doing our copperhead project, there's a threat of snake fungal disease that's actually showing up in a lot of species that I didn't talk about. But that's another threat to snakes. That's really serious right now. So they get these like lesions all over them, and it especially happens when they're brumating. They're in their hibernacula, which is what their hibernation areas are called, where multiple snakes kind of den together. And they think it's probably exacerbated by warming climate. So the fungus doesn't get killed off in the cold. So it kind of grows over these animals while they're kind of still in these kind of very damp under subterranean environments. And then they come out and they have these lesions. So some snakes just shed it off and they're fine. But we have seen snakes getting these really gnarly ones where they can't eat. Their mouths are all looking disgusting and things like that. So that's a big threat to snakes. So what happens is a lot of people, like herpers, for instance, are going to these different rattlesnake dens to go take pictures and see them, maybe for innocent reasons, just to see them. They're not poaching. They're not doing anything bad. They're just looking at these animals. But if they're not disinfecting their boots between sites, they could unknowingly be spreading these fungus to different sites. So also people that were doing caving or doing rappelling and things like that, a lot of these rock outcrop dens probably spread this stuff. So that's a big problem, you know, a lot of these species. They're threatened for that reason. That too. Yeah, they think a lot of cavers were spreading that fungus. So, you know, so what we do, we disinfect our equipment between sites. So we do wood turtle research too. It's a big project we're working on now. But if we go between any different sites, we use this, it changed. It was 10% bleach to water solution. And you spray it, you wash it with water, then you spray the bleach solution. And we have a video online that shows you how to do it. But you wash, and then you let it sit for 5 minutes, and then you wash it off. So that bleach helps kill the virus. And now I think they're down a lower percent. I think it's like 3%. It was 10. But so we want to be good stewards, right? So if we're going out there enjoying these things, we're the ones going out into all this cool habitat where maybe going off trail and finding these animals. So we don't want to be the ones spreading all this stuff, right? Also watch your boots for invasive plants. A lot of the seeds get stuck in your boots. So if you're just going from site to site, you could be spreading, you know, basket grass and all this other nasty stuff from sites. So just think about that stuff when you're out enjoying these animals. But get out there and enjoy them, you know. Go discover them, you know. Find out what's in your area. Look at the range maps. You know, find out the habitat. Find out the time of year. Like hognose snakes, we call it Hogtober, October. So Hogtober is when the hognose snakes seem to be really active, and you see them more often. So if you really want to find a hognose snake, find the habitat where they're more often found, maybe the more sandy habitat. There's lots of toads in October. You got a much better chance of seeing them than going out in like the heat of July at like 2 p.m. So, you know, learning those things too, like when are animals most active, what time of year are they most active, things like that is really important. So enjoy. Any other questions? We good? So feel free to grab some stickers up front. You're welcome.